Hi, and welcome everyone. My name is Sophie Torres. I'm the Vice President of Policy and Business Advocacy here at the San Antonio Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. We're excited to have you join us on this webinar of how to cultivate more resilient employees. Just a few housekeeping rules per usual. All attendees will be on listen-only mode. Should you have any questions or anything, please feel free to enter that in the chat, in the Q&A box, or raise your hand. There will be time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. It is my pleasure to introduce Rachel Bell. She is the chair of the Military Affairs Committee here at the San Antonio Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and she'll be introducing Jesse and Joe from SolutionPoint. Thank you so much for joining us. Rachel, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and I'm so glad that you've been able to take some time from your afternoon today to have this important conversation. I know, we all have heard a lot lately about resilience and a need to be resilient, and how people who can be resilient are doing well in this COVID situation. And it's important, I think, in the context of those broader conversations to think about how can you apply some lessons about resilience. How can you operationally put those ideals into practice? And it's one thing to say, well, those people seem really resilient, they're going to be great. But it's another thing to say, what tools can I adopt within my organization? And it's important to understand that it's not just something that you happen to have or you don't. It's something that you can learn. And I'm so happy that San Antonio has Jesse and Joe from SolutionPoint Plus, whose job it is to help organizations understand not only the importance of mental wellness and resilience, but how to put those things into practice across all industries. Something I know that they will talk about, and we'll get into a little bit in this conversation, is that of course this crisis has taken a toll on everybody's mental wellness. Right now, we are in it. We've been in it, and we're stressed. And in fact, the Washington Post just released a study, cited some research from the Census Bureau that said that 1/3 of Americans are experiencing some kind of stress and anxiety due to this situation. That's a lot of us. And so it's important to learn how to effectively cope with that, and how to fuel resilience and how to minimize that post-traumatic stress. I'm going to introduce Jesse and Joe. I'm going to explain some about their experience and their perspective. Again, I'm so grateful that they're here. They're both combat veterans, so I love highlighting the work of military-connected entrepreneurs and people who have military experience. I think their insight is going to be tremendously helpful. Joe is a highly sought mental health policy and training consultant. He's not only a decorated Marine Corps combat veteran, but he is also a celebrated mental health police officer. And he has de-escalated hundreds of crisis situations in the field with zero uses of force. And so he has been instrumental in crisis interventions and helping with mental health advocacy and law enforcement policy at all levels. Jesse Trevino is his partner and is also a U.S. Marine Corps combat veteran, mental health police officer, police academy instructor, and a criminal justice academic. He has analyzed and designed and implemented innovative programs that address social problems like homelessness and mental illness and substance dependence. And he is also involved with academic research and projects for this subject matter. So we're so grateful that you guys are here and you bring your experience and your perspective and your expertise to this conversation. And so I'm going to turn it over to you guys and help us understand sort of where you're coming from with helping people understand resilience and mental wellness from an organizational standpoint. And maybe you can just help us understand sort of what even is resilience. What do we mean by that?
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Sophie, and thank you to the San Antonio Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. We really do appreciate this opportunity to be with you, to share a little bit of insight over the next 45 minutes or so. So the first thing is to understand the word resilience, right? There are a lot of different definitions when we talk about this, but it's something that most people are not taught. And I love what Rachel said about, like, don't beat yourself up because it can be learned. And we absolutely believe in that. And that's really what we do. We've been doing this for a very long time. And so obviously we're trying to change the fact that most people are not taught or trained in what resilience is. And I find it interesting, and I find it, I don't know, it's also a little bit sad if we think about it, but there's the problems that we're facing each and every day, whether it was COVID and the pandemic, the economic downturn, looking back at 9/11, the different wars, whatever trials or trauma that we face, it all really becomes an individual experience. And so when we talk about resilience, we're talking about an individual's ability to bounce back from something. But one of the problems when we talk about resilience is, in the definition, is the word toughness. And I think this is where we have to be very careful, because especially as a man, we have done an incredible disservice in this country of creating this false phenomenon, if you will, of what being tough means. And being a veteran, being a police officer, being in these, historically patriarchal type A professions, the word tough really can send the wrong message to someone. And so what Jesse and I are really trying to do is redefine the word toughness. And toughness is really, it's the willingness to be vulnerable. It's you're willing to be seen. It's you're willing to reach out when you need help. And tough is not suppressing your emotions. Tough is not hiding from what it is you're dealing with. So I just wanted to start with that, but I want to do a little bit more of an introduction, because we heard something at one of the conferences that Jesse and I were speaking at, and he said, if people don't know who you are, they won't listen to you, right? And so while Rachel did a great job reading parts of the bio, I think it's important that we just go a little bit deeper and just have a little bit better understanding of who I am, and then Jesse will introduce himself. Real quick, before that, also, along with resilience, I think that we have a responsibility. And again, it's not anyone's fault, it's just a societal issue. But if I were to say to you, are you familiar with ACEs? And some people would think of like playing cards, or like, "Oh, I know what ACEs are," but not a lot of people understand what ACEs are in the context of adverse childhood experiences. And that there was a study done. And so ACEs is the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, an incredible study. It's really, really informative. And so I encourage everyone to just look into that, but do it responsibly. It's one of the courses that we teach as well. And it really gets people to kind of look back on their own life and think about, it makes sense of why you are where you are and why you do what you do. The other thing is understanding that the more we understand about the effects of trauma, the better off we're going to be individually and as a society as a whole. So originally I'm from New York. I had a very, very traumatic upbringing. I didn't go to third grade the first time because I had incredible amounts of trauma, physical, sexual abuse. And so I spent my entire third grade year going to therapy 3 days a week. Fast forward, life's a mess, very unstable home life. And I have my first kid at 17, my senior year of high school, which is why I joined the Marine Corps, was to take care of my daughter. So 4 days after high school, joined the Marine Corps, and that was in 2000. And that's where I met Jesse. And so I joke, but it's true. I say that Jesse, our friendship is the longest relationship I've ever had in my life, including family. But that's the reality. And so he has been a staple in my life as a friend. And so I'm really, really grateful that we get to share this experience together and be on this journey, really to improve people's lives, because that's ultimately what we're trying to do. We met in 2000. We did 4 years in the Marine Corps, 2 combat tours with the initial push after 9/11. And then when the war started in 03, we were with 1st Marines, and we pushed up into Iraq. And so we firsthand experienced trauma, loss of friends to suicide, lost fellow Marines overseas, and just the trauma that really impacted us once we returned, right? Because we've all heard that once you come back from something like that, just because you're physically back doesn't mean that you're mentally back. And we weren't, and it's taken us a lot of work. And even though we've been in each other's lives for 20 years, we've had some breaks where I was going through some stuff personally. Jesse's going through some stuff personally. And what I would say is that I really have become a master in my life at hiding my pain and suppressing my pain. In fact, growing up, my nickname was Smiley, even though I was experiencing incredible trauma at home. And so that's not always a good thing, right? Because again, I was inherently trying to be tough, whatever that even means. And so I'm trying to undo all that work. And before I pass it to Jesse, I just, it's our tagline for our company is that we cultivate mental wellness to maximize human capital and promote safety. And so while that's maybe a little wordy and scientific, it really means something to us because we really believe in cultivating mental wellness. We think that health should be holistic whole health, that your mental health really should be a part of your physical health, and that we really work hard on trying to remove the stigma from all things mental health related. And so being well, I think, it's almost like before we can truly become mentally well or mentally healthy, or before we can become resilient, we first have to better understand who we are. And so you can't start at the end of the race, right? So you have to do some tough work. You have to dig within yourself. You have to look within your own life and realize, why is it that I do what I do? When we do these trainings, I challenge people and I say, I would venture to say that almost nobody in this room, and same thing with this webinar, and it's not to be offensive, but there's probably very few people who actually know who they are. And what I mean by that is, as a society, we are addicted to benchmarks, to achievements, to degrees, to positions, to status. But that's not who you are. Those are just things you do. And so when you say, who are you? And immediately you go to, well, I'm a doctor, I'm a business owner, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a veteran, I'm a father, those are just things, right? But who are you? Like what sends you? Like, why do you get mad about the things you get mad about? Why do you feel insecure when you're insecure? Do you know? And so few people actually understand this because so few people have spent years and years in therapy understanding life, neuroscience, psychology, and how they got to where they are. And the last thing is just understand that I'll talk about more at this at the end when Jesse highlights the problem here, but all of the work that we do really stems from positive psychology, right? And what we know, what the science supports is that positive emotions fuel resiliency. Right. So again, this is something that you can learn because we all know about the negativity bias and the self-talk and how we are our own worst enemy. We tend to beat ourselves up and we're very hard on ourselves about certain things. But positive emotions fuel resiliency. It's important that we understand that, all right, because we individually control how it is that we see the world. And so if we have negative self-talk, it's going to be a challenge. If we have positive affirmations, if we have things that I'll get into during my portion here in a bit, about ways that we can adopt self-care methods. And I have 6 pillars of self-care that we've created, and I'll share some of those with you. But I just think it's important that you understand that. And Jesse, I'm going to pass it to you. Tell them a little bit about who you are, and then we'll jump in.
Thanks, Joe. Welcome all of you. I appreciate Rachel and the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce of San Antonio giving us a chance to talk to you on this very important topic. So Joe told you a little bit about himself. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. So I'm a Texas native. I was born and raised in South Texas, near the border of Carrizo Springs, Texas. Grew up in a very poor family, and I joined the Marine Corps out of high school, and hung around in town. I hung around in town in a year and did some work, but I was gone soon after. And it's interesting, right? So Joe talks about how we were in the Marine Corps together, and it's interesting how fate works, because I would have never ever met Joe if not for breaking my foot at the Crucible, which is a last thing you do, an evolution in the Marine Corps that you have to finish to become a Marine. And if you don't, you kind of got to go back and start over. It's a 3-day evolution, and it's grueling, and it's the last thing you do before you earn the title Marine. And my foot hurt really bad, but I wasn't going to say anything about it. And once I became a Marine and came back to Garrison, I said, hey, my foot hurts. I need to go to the doctor. And I had a broken foot. And that setback kind of put me in limbo while the rest of my cohort, if you will, went on. And when I got healed and picked back up, that's where I met this guy. And since then, we've both grown together, had life experiences together, and eventually got into law enforcement together and found a common cause and it's become our life's work. And all things surrounding mental health has been important to us, and it's helped us grow our business as well. Um, so I am diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. I have mental illness. I'm very open about it. I had childhood trauma, like Joe. While different trauma, it was childhood trauma, family related. And then when we went to combat, I experienced more trauma, and I kind of hid from it. I kind of buried myself in all things. Some things healthy, some things not, and until I got help. And since then, I've been engaged in therapy. I also take medication, and this has been very important to me, right? Because I want to be a contributing member of society. I want to be a good family person. I want to be a good friend. So all those things to be done, we have to care for ourselves. And that's what we're going to talk about today, both at the individual level and, as Rachel mentioned, at the organizational level, because this really is important at the organizational level. I'm going to get into that now. So what is resilience? Why are we even talking about it? So Rachel gave us a good intro, so did Joe. Um, we know that the human experience is difficult. As human beings, we're going to face things. We're going to face challenges. We're going to face setbacks, tragedies, stress, anxiety, depression, loneliness, all types of things. And as Joe mentioned, there's an entire science behind the concept of positive psychology. That's where this comes from. When we talk about mental or emotional resilience, simply put, it's our ability to adapt, withstand, or recover from all of those things I just mentioned. Why do we want to talk about employee mental resilience or employee resilience? Simply stated, because the better we are at being able to do the things we just talked about, the more resilient we are. It's a learnable, implementable, and useful skill / construct that we're going to talk to you about today. People often aren't aware of the prevalence of mental health issues. So when we talk about implementing it in businesses and why, I want to get to that point. I'm going to demonstrate the need and the problem for you. And then Joe will, on the back end, kind of give you some tips and pointers that you can both take for yourself individually and for your organization. And Rachel touched on it because historically, when we think of mental illness, we often have stereotypes in front of our minds. When I say mental illness, you're probably thinking about, the homeless individual, a person talking to themselves, someone just psychotic or decompensated, whatever stigma brings us to those thoughts. But in reality, we all have mental health and we all have varying levels of mental wellness. The National Alliance on Mental Illness tells us that 1 in 5 people suffer from mental health issues annually. Some years previously, that's been about 1 in 4. But as Rachel mentioned, they're looking at things, and some of the literature coming out because of COVID-19, that number is actually now 1 in 3. That is incredible. So a third of people are experiencing some type of mental health issue. And because of this, most of it is dealing with depression or anxiety or both. That's a pretty high number. So think about your organizations, think about your people, think about your family, think about your friends. If you look at that number, statistically speaking, they're going to be around you, and it might even be you. Now, I often get asked, why should any business owner or organization care about this? Well, first, I'd like to think that most of you here are exceptional leaders. You ascribe to these newer generational leadership theories, and that's to say you care about your people, how they're doing, you care about their development, their overall being, and you want productivity. And that's important. And I know a lot of organizations think about this. But most organizations think about wellness in general terms, mainly as it speaks to physical wellness or medical wellness. And I'll get into that. But what I would tell you is there's more to it on why you should be concerned with this and why it should matter to you for your organizations. Inc. published a story in 2019, and I had been wondering about this for some time, and there's some research that I had come across that kind of explains how organizations and business are being affected because of mental health. by not considering it, by not worrying about it, by not doing the right things for it. So it's a big number. And if you look at mental illness and substance use in America, these things cost employers and business an estimated 226 billion each year. And several studies confirm that. And those numbers were taken from 2003. And I would like to say it's probably much higher now. But that's a huge number annually that it's affecting business. Now, when we think about losses, some constructs are easier in social science to measure. And if I told you, hey, mental illness and substance use is costing your company this much money, you automatically would go to the concept of absenteeism. That is, I know that someone is not mentally well, or they're using things, they're not at work. So when they're not at work, they're not producing. That's easy to measure. It's easy to be concerned with. And you might be thinking, well, I don't see that problem because a lot of my people show up to work, which is interesting because other studies that have come post and recently kind of discuss this for us. And they want to explain what are the indirect and direct costs related to these losses, where are these numbers coming from? So the largest indirect cost of businesses when employees struggle with mental illness comes from decreased performance, actually. So that's to say, it isn't about absenteeism. As a matter of fact, absenteeism only accounted for 20% of those losses I just talked about. In reality, 80% of the losses that are affecting business today have to deal with the concept of presenteeism. That is to say that people are in your organization and they're not well. They're just going through things personally, individually. They're hiding it, they're masking it, and they're at work just barely hanging on, and they're not producing for you. Most people don't realize this. This study has gone on again and again in different contexts, and the 80-20 ratio has been pretty consistent. So 80% is dealing with presenteeism. There's other studies that look at this through leadership theories, and they refer to this as being checked out. I've also seen that. So there's different constructs, but it all leads to this. And like I mentioned, several other constructs have come out of this too. Now, I know that you guys probably have really good healthcare plans, right? Maybe you have programs like if somebody hits so many steps a day, you're going to give them an incentive. Or if they get their flu shot, they get an incentive, or they get so much sick time, or all these different things. And you guys focus on physical wellness and medical wellness. When Joe and I talk to business owners, we see one commonality when we bring up the topic of mental health or mental wellness. We get hey, we have an EAP. And herein lies the rub, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm going to tell you why. We know, and we keep seeing the research, we've seen it ourselves with every organization we work with, having a website and an 800 number isn't enough. It's great and it's needed, but it isn't enough. Now, I want to put the onus on these organizations because going back to those leadership theories we just discussed, that's good to know. Awesome. Um, we like that because Joe and I can go back and make fun of ourselves later. So, but that's good. So we have all these things that I'm giving you, right? I'm giving you all of the problem. But there is a way that you can address this. It's what our whole business is about, and we're going to help you with that. And like I mentioned, resilience can be developed internally, individually, and organizationally. So we have you all here, and fortunately for you, we have an expert in this exact field. He's even a master trainer in this, and that's my business partner, Joe. So having said that, I'd like to bring it over to him to discuss some ways that you can develop resiliency internally and organizationally. Joe.
Thanks, Jesse. All right. So when we were planning this and putting it together, and Rachel was talking to us, asking about, hey, how can we form this? What are some things that we could do? And we kind of collectively brainstormed different ideas. And so there were some key points that came out of those conversations, and I want to address some of them and then provide just a little bit of takeaways. Um, Hopefully that will resonate with you all. Real quick, though, I'm a firm believer in this quote from Socrates that says, he says, "I'm not here to teach anybody anything. I can only make them think." Right. And so, again, learning is an individual experience. And so we appreciate everyone being here and tuning into this. But really, our goal is to just get you to think differently. And what I say is challenge your beliefs. Like whatever it is that you historically have always believed, challenge that. Maybe there's an alternative. And I think that's more important now than ever. One of the things that came up was addressing safety. This is a huge topic. And when we talk about safety in particular, we tend to think more on the reactive side, right? There's been years. I mean, look at our school systems. We've gone from fire drills to active shooter drills. It's a sad, sad reality. And that is, we like to convince ourselves that we're doing these active shooter drills as a prevention mechanism. But the reality is, we're doing active shooter drills for if this incident happens, then this is how we're going to respond after the fact. I think we're missing a huge opportunity still. The work that we do, we focus more on the prevention side. We really, really believe that if you focus energy and effort and resources on an individual, on a person, and really allow people to become humans and really get them to understand the benefits of being vulnerable and being willing to be seen and to connect with one another, it is so powerful what happens. And you get that real sense of community. And that can be with two people, right? So it doesn't matter how big your organization is, if it's something massive like a USAA, or if it's a small town business that has you and your spouse running it and you have no other employees. It still can be beneficial. And so I think it's important when we talk about safety, understand that the work that we do ideally is going to prevent these incidents from ever happening. Why? Because people are showing up to work feeling like it's a safe space. And if I'm having a bad day at home, if I'm having a personal problem in my marriage, if I'm having, there's a terminal illness in my family and I'm stressed out, I'm not going to fear the culture of the organization. I'm not going to hold all those feelings back. I'm not going to suppress all those. Show up to work being fully present, like Jesse said, but completely checked out. That's where we're seeing these biggest impacts, especially financially. And what happens when people don't feel supported by their organizations, that's where we start to see these vendettas being built. It's displaced blame, really, because it becomes the organization's fault. Well, if they didn't make me be here because I have to come to work, I have to have money, I have to have insurance, but if they didn't make me show up, or if they didn't refuse me to have time off, then I wouldn't do X, Y, and Z. And we know that's not rational, but again, it's not always about addressing a rational person. It's about getting a person to understand that they are supported early on. And so we look really holistically at this culture and the impact that your organization's culture has on the individual level. The next thing is empathy. This came up, right? And I think empathy and leadership really do go hand in hand. In fact, Simon Sinek says the staple trait in a good leader is empathy. And, that is also one of those things, much like resilience, that isn't necessarily taught. It's one of those buzzwords that gets thrown around. Some people are like, well, I'm an empathetic person. Or some people are like, they have no empathy. Regardless of what camp you're in, understand that it is a tool, it is a skill that you can learn. It is something that you can develop. It is something that you can foster. It is something that you absolutely can better understand and learn how to use. One of the reasons why people are so afraid to tell another human being what they're experiencing or how they feel is because they're either embarrassed, they're afraid of being judged, or they're terrified of the consequence. And so those three things really are blocks for people to prevent them from reaching out. And so having empathy as a leader is super, super important, because having the ability to connect with human beings on a very, very deep level. I'll tell you, this is one of those things that Jesse and I do really, really well. And it's when Rachel was reading the bio, and again, countless. I mean, I've dealt with over 1,000 different situations in the field, in the midst of a crisis, when it's at the peak, whether they're holding firearms or knives, or they're wanting to jump off of things, and to not have any use of force incidents really does speak volumes to the ability to connect with people, because that's our goal. So for me, I don't focus on the problem, I focus on the person. And I think too many people focus on the problem instead of the people of the problem. And again, our goal, anytime we interact with somebody, our goal is connection, not correction. And that's not a jail term. That can just be like fixing the problem. Too many people focus on, how do I fix this? How can I change it? How can I make it better because I'm uncomfortable? And so we have to learn, and there's a way to do it, but we have to learn how to get out of this mindset of correcting things or fixing things, and simply just connecting with people and allowing things to breathe, because we get much further when we do things like that. The next thing is wellness, right? And I talked a little bit about this earlier. We talked about the definition of it and how that word toughness is in there, which again, I would say challenge. Ask yourself what being tough really means. I share this, this story of, for those of you that have children, if you have small children, and let's say you have a boy and a girl, and I'm all about doing self-assessments, right? And it's not about shaming yourself for the things that we've done wrong. It's about learning from things and growing. But if you have a boy and a girl, which I do, we know that most parents in this country, again, it's a cultural thing. Most parents, if a 3-year-old girl falls, scrapes her knee, starts crying, we immediately pick her up, coddle her. We give her kisses and tell her it's going to be okay. And we buy her ice cream and make her feel like a princess and tell her it's going to be all right. If the 3-year-old boy falls and scrapes his knee, the response typically, especially from the father, sometimes from a mother, especially if it's a single mother trying to play both roles, is, hey, get up, don't you dare cry. You have to be tough. I need you to be strong. You have to be tough. Get up. What we're essentially communicating from a very, very early age in this country is, if you're a boy, do not express your emotions. It's not okay for you to talk about your pain. It's not okay for you to talk about your hurt. If you're a girl, go ahead and emote. We expect it. But the problem is, when you're now 18 or 20 or whatever arbitrary age you want to pick, boys are like, man, she's so emotional when they get into their first or second relationship. And they're like, man, this girl's so emotional. I don't know what's going on with her. And then the girl or wives are like, oh, my husband has like no emotion. He doesn't ever tell me how he feels. It's because we don't know how, right? It's because people haven't been taught. What has been fostered is this ability of like, hey, don't share what you're feeling if you're a boy. Please share what you're feeling if you're a girl. And then when you're 18 or 20, it's just, now go figure it out. And I think it's a super unfair and unrealistic expectation that people, just because they reach a certain age, that we would suddenly expect them to adult well. We do not do a good enough job preparing people, preparing kids to become adults in this world. We simply don't. And so, when we're talking about wellness, remember, it's picture the entire thing, not just being physically in great shape. Like, you can run a marathon, you can lift all this weight, you can do all this stuff, but where are you mentally? And what I tell people is, you are your most authentic self the moment you lay down to go to sleep, the last thing you're thinking about before you fall asleep. That really tells you a pretty good picture of who you are. And I would ask you to think about it tonight when you're going to bed. Think about last night. What were you thinking about right before you fell asleep? Were you stressed about today, the next day? Were you stressed about something that's going to come in the future? Were you worried or angry or frustrated or sad about something that already passed? Where do you spend your time? Because that's a great place to check in. And that's where most people really finally, like, because they are safe in the comfort of their own self. And I'm falling asleep. I'm alone in my thoughts. Where does your mind go? I would say, think about that. The next one is leadership. Again, Jesse touched on this, talked about this, so I won't go too much into it. But again, I think leadership is the ability to be an effective listener. It's to be an effective communicator, and it's knowing what resources you have available to you. I think, again, that can really go in depths, but I think that's pretty important. And then the last thing here before I wrap I wanted to talk specifically. So we created these pillars that we call the 6 pillars of self-care, and because of time, I won't be able to go into all of them, but I want to just pick out a couple and give you an example of why I think it's important. So one of the 6 is physical self-care, right? With physical self-care, we have things like having a routine primary care physician. Like when's the last time you went to a doctor just for an annual physical? For so many adults, it's like, I haven't been in years. Why? Well, because I feel healthy. I'm good. I sleep all right. I feel all right. Nothing hurts. Why go to the doctor? Because again, that is a form of prevention, getting your blood work done. It's so simple, and yet so many people neglect it. And if you have insurance, why not take advantage of it and just go get your blood work checked out? Food and diet. Again, these are all under physical self-care. Food and diet are huge. We know how important these are. But when we teach this, when we roll it out, and just this one portion is usually around 90 minutes when we do the 6 pillars. But what I say is, hey, you don't have to master everything. There's no expectation that you're going to be an expert in every single one of these. But if you can just pick a couple, and I am the first to tell you that I try and live my life not as a hypocrite. And so I don't do great in food and diet. I'm a proud paisan. I love Italian food. I love pizzas and pastas. And so I don't do great there. So I try and make up for it in my sleep. I take my sleep very serious. And so, which is one of the portions under physical self-care as well. We have a sleep epidemic in our country. We have become a society of human doings, not human beings. So few people will actually intentionally become still and really do nothing because it's so uncomfortable. The reason why people are so busy and are on the go all the time is because they're usually uncomfortable being their true self. Because when they're sitting on their own and they're thinking on their own, they don't like where their mind goes. And so the best way to do that is to distract from it, and we become busy. And so we convince ourselves, and I'll tell you, Jesse and I both did this. He got his master's degree. I got my bachelor's degree. We both finished top of our class. I got 5 classes left. I have 5 classes left for my master's degree, but we've done these out of avoidance because we don't want to deal with the things that are going on in our head. And so we go achieve these things, which people on the outside would think like, oh, you guys are doing great. Not necessarily, right? And so that one's super important. And then physical intimacy. Human beings are meant to be connected people. Physical touch, intimacy is a huge, huge people. Forgive me, but I always make the caveat for men. This does not just mean sex. There is non-sexual touch and just a hug. In fact, there was a study done that I love to share, and they did the effects on the power of a 23-second hug releases 12 hours of oxytocin, which is the equivalent of a workout. And so what I would say is the next time you go in to hug somebody, which who knows when that's going to be, right? Because pandemic, but we're getting closer. But the next time you have that embrace, or even if it's in your house and your family, do it for 23 seconds. Just hold it. It's awkward at first, but I'm telling you right now, I've had people reach out to me, mothers reach out to me saying that they make it a staple in their house now. It's incredibly powerful. So that's some of the physical self-care. And then real quick with psychological. So one of the things for psychological self-care is spending time in reflection. This can be a myriad of things, but I'm a big, big believer in journaling. I'm a big believer in having a gratitude journal. I have a gratitude practice. I do it every single day. I do not miss it. This morning was actually day number 351 in a row because it tracks it for me. I use an app on my phone, but it is so powerful. I like to say that the first 3 minutes set your compass for the day. If you wake up and right away you're thinking about stress and worry and like, oh, I don't like this. I hate this job. I don't like my spouse. I don't like this house. I can't pay my bills. I don't like this. Like you're going to have a pretty bad day. And we all know this because we've all had it. So set your intention. The moment you wake up, be intentional. It takes 3 to 5 minutes. And the way I do my gratitude practice is I pick 3 things every single day that are new. They have to be within the last 24 hours or that day or for like today. And they have to change every single day. So you can't repeat. And it forces you. And I'll tell you, for doing this almost a year, there's been times where I have to sit there and I'm intentionally thinking like, man, what am I grateful for? Because it was just a regular routine habitual day, nothing really great. I've already used the house and the car and the shoes and the job and the money and I've used all that. So now it's like, you have to really, really get intentional, but it's a great place to be. And again, we know this from a neuroscience standpoint. of what happens, and we understand the reward systems and the dopamine, or the dopaminergic, they call it in neuroscience, and how you can trigger your reward system when you set goals, whether they're short-term or long-term, and you actually work towards them. And so super important. Another thing under the psychological self-care is meditation and mindfulness. And this is something that I love doing because, so I went through an 8-week course, and it was a mindfulness-based stress reduction course. And it was 8 weeks of doing meditation practices, different ways of doing it. And so now I teach it to first responders, and it's great because they're super uncomfortable. But when we do a guided meditation practice and they actually have the experience, what I show them, and we do this experience or this exercise with a lemon, and there's no lemons in the room, but I like take them on this journey, and then they're cutting lemons and like, oh, and they're feeling the salivation in their jaw. But I say, hey, look, basically what we can prove is that with our thoughts alone, we can create a physiological response. So we can essentially think ourselves to health and think ourselves to wellness, or we can think ourselves to death. And it really does come down to that, because stress is toxic, and people who live in stress, people who live with anxiety, which again, understand what anxiety is. Anxiety is future driven. It's fear of an untold story that is yet to happen. It's something that we've created. And most of what we fear never comes true. But that's what anxiety is for so many people. We're focusing on things that have yet to happen, but we're worrying about it. And so learning to become present, learning to develop a strong mindfulness or meditation practice, whether it's prayer or it's an actual, Buddhist or whatever it is you want to do, there's different ways to do it. Spending time in nature, going on walks, like there's all kinds of different ways to do walking meditation, guided meditation, silent meditation. You can meditate while you eat. There's all kinds of ways. And so I think it's super important that you understand the different ways that you can start to cultivate your own wellness, the benefits of that. Because lastly, and then I'll finish and we'll go to Rachel for questions, but we know, because we've proven it, we can absolutely help. We can absolutely serve other people because it's so much easier to do. But what I would say is it's actually far more impactful when you can actually serve someone based on the help that you've done yourself. So for years, I told everybody, this is how you can fix your life. This is what you should do. You need this medication. You need this hospital. You got to go here. And I wasn't doing any of it. And I lived my life in hypocrisy, and I live with that. So now I'm very, very intentional. I still go to therapy every month. I'm a firm believer in therapy. Everybody should have a therapist, just because this world is not trained to deal with your problems. Your spouse is not trained to deal with your problems. And so everybody should have an individual therapist. I believe that. And so I still go every month for maintenance. And so a lot of what we deliver is not just based on learned experience, it's based on lived experience as well. And so we combine those to provide the services that we provide. So I think we'll end it there. I think because we're about 10 minutes out, Rachel. And so I don't know if there's any questions that came in or comments that we can address. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love hearing you guys talk, because you're so full of knowledge. You have so much that you can bring into any situation, organization, and it's all helpful. It's all timely. And as you were talking, I was trying to take some notes about these key points that you made, and try to tie it into what you've shared with us is very practical, and it's very possible. Like these are things that can be implemented individually as well as organizationally, just by making it a priority. It sounds like, really, I mean, by putting some steps into place and by demonstrating that to the leadership of the organization, these are important things. And therefore you're fostering this culture of wellness by showing that it's important, right, to be mindful of it. I mean, something as simple as that, I think, to some can sound really intimidating or expensive, right? But, or something that may not be needed. But I think you've done a really good job of showing sort of the need for that kind of thing, and the simple steps that can be taken. I think that's great. I know that there's a lot of useful things that can be taken from that. I wanted to also mention too, when you mentioned sleep, You know, we've heard it. So much of what you said is based on the experience that you've had individually, as well as, you know, the professional work that you do. But I think also it applies within this new COVID construct, right? Because we know that's like sleep is harder now for people. Like we see the studies, and I've seen research that shows that it's more disturbed now than before, because we don't have that really healthy way to process what has just happened with my day, right? And to your point too, Joe, you know, I'm a hugger. I'm outgoing, and I just like to, and we haven't gotten to do that, like for those of us, right? And I think even for the introverts among us too, you still need to have some kind of, we're reprogramming the way that we've been navigating, and that understandably has come with challenges. And so for employers to be mindful of that, and to take steps, I guess, within an organization to pay attention to that and put some systems in place to address that, is possible. And you've given us some really good ideas to get started with that, and I appreciate it. And there was somebody who had a question, Cynthia. She wanted to know, well, let's see. Of course, everybody appreciates you telling us your stories and being vulnerable. So thank you, of course. They appreciate that. Thank you, Christina. And Cynthia Harper wanted to know if you guys go out into the community to speak on this topic. So can people reach out to you, or how are you able to get this message out? I mean, I would say this is one way, Cynthia. I was privileged enough to see them speak at a conference for other military connected entrepreneurs. And I was so excited that they lived in San Antonio. After their keynote speech, I was like, I need to get you in to talk to my members at the Hispanic Chamber. And so, but I know that you have other things that you guys do, and I'll let you talk about that.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks, Cynthia, for that. So yes, we do. We go wherever we're asked, really. I mean, we're trying to get into schools. We actually have HEB as a client, so they've realized the importance and they've brought us in. So wherever, the big thing for us is just getting recognition. We actually, because of COVID and everyone being quarantined, started trying to build up our online presence more. And so we started a YouTube channel just like a week ago, which is SolutionPoint Plus altogether, and then space LLC. If you look at that YouTube, come subscribe. We do videos every week. On Saturdays, we've been doing interviews every Saturday and streaming them live on Facebook with different people. We just did cancer survivors and a winning mindset this weekend. We've done veteran business entrepreneurs. We've done single moms at home during COVID. So we change the topic every week, and we've done 8 or 9 of them. And so we're trying to put as much information as we can out to the community, because again, we just really believe in what we're doing. And to your point, Rachel, that my fear is that we know it takes about 42 days to develop a new habit, 6 weeks. We've been in quarantine for more than 6 weeks. And so not all habits are good habits. And so I'm worried about, as we start to come out of this, that we're going to have to a lot of people are going to have to undo habits that they have developed, and sleep being one of those. And you're right. We are consuming more information than we ever have. Working from home, we're consuming information via Zoom. We're doing so many webinars now and Zoom calls and different things like this, and it's just nonstop. And then when you take a break from this, a lot of people turn to their phones or to TV. And so we know the stimulation that happens within the brain when you're looking at screens all day long. And so, yeah, to think that you're just going to go to bed, it doesn't happen. Or you will out of exhaustion, but then you wake up pretty quickly. So, but yeah, so thank you for the question, Cynthia.
Yeah.
And I think Jesse just put in the chat box our contact info as well.
Absolutely. And something that Rachel said, which was so important, you know, I've seen a lot of organizations that talk about culture change, and then they'll go to an organization and they have this complex methodology involving everything from financials to just like hiring practices and everything in between. Our practices are very practical, and they're learnable, implementable. And I love that you see that, Rachel. And I love how you can hear something and you just extract everything that needs to be heard from it directly. So thanks for saying that. That's absolutely true.
Thank you. No, it's a random skill I have, but I'm glad to be able to use it. It resonates though. I think it resonates with so many of us, no matter what industry. And I love also that it applies to those who are, you happen to have military experience and you happen to have experienced it personally in a way that most people don't. And to transcend that stigma, I think is important. It's good for everybody to see that these things apply to not just military people and not just within military organizations, but to every organization and all people. And it's important to understand sort of how to work through it. And
Yeah. So, something that Joe mentions, I'm sorry,
yeah.
is that we've been involved in very, classical style organizations. We've been involved in paramilitary organizations for a very long time. And if we can transcend those cultures to implement things like this, we argue that we can do it with any organization. And we're very confident about that.
Yeah. And also, I think finally, I'm going to kind of wrap with this. It's that it's not, I think it is like a daunting prospect when you think of organizationally, but I think in incremental change, like small things make a really big difference. And employees that are empowered with that ability are going to perform for you so much more, right? Like it pays off, not just because you're mitigating the cost on the front end, but then you're paying it forward from here, right? These are small things that are possible and can be done, but are good for the organization and the future of it. And so I think as people look forward to how we map out, our professional landscape post-COVID, we all know it's going to look different in lots of different ways. And to your point, Joe, sure, there's going to be things to be undone and things like that, but it's still, we're going to get to craft it too. It's kind of like a nice, it can be a positive thing, right? Like we get to be intentional with what we want it to look like. And so for all of us who have been traumatized in some way or affected in some way negatively from this, we can start to put small incremental changes into place from an organizational and an employee standpoint that can create a better, a more healthy professional space for all of us going forward. So I'm so grateful that we got to have this conversation today. Really, it's very timely. I know it's something that is important to the Hispanic Chamber and to our chair. It's among the values that the organization wanted to promote, especially this year. And I want to be mindful of everybody's time, so I don't want to belabor any point when I can talk forever. But you guys have just done a great job, and I appreciate your taking the time. And I want to thank all of our participants too. Of course, as Sophie mentioned, this has been recorded. I know, Jesse, I don't know where that interruption came from, but it's been recorded. People will be able to have access to it after. People will know how to find you. Your website is solutionpointplus.com. You can also get in touch with us at the Chamber if anybody has follow-up questions or they want to know anything else. Please know I'm available also, and we're here to help. So I think with that, if there's not any other questions from the chat, I know I think we can end here. It's a good point to end. And so I want to see if Sophie is here. Here you are.
Hi, thank you again, Rachel, Jesse, Joe. We really appreciate this conversation. It's very timely, and I got a lot of positive feedback as well on the back end. Like I said, thank you very much for everyone that attended, and we hope to see everyone virtually soon again and give those hugs and everything. So thank you so much, and we'll all be in touch soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.